So we're going to keep letting people in. It was awesome to see over 60 people had registered for today's event. Also in the chat, like, let us know if, like, how many of these sessions you've attended. Is this your first one? Is this your fifth one? You know, because we're on our fifth one, and kind of like would love to get any feedback thus far. So again, my name is Millie Hurt. You are at the network. National Equity Together takes work. Um, Unfortunately, we can't all just like sit on our laurels. We have to be the squeaky wheels. This topic of pay equity is very near and dear to my heart. Don't know about you all, but I know firsthand that I have been discriminated against from a pay standpoint in the past, and I'm sure that you're on here because either you're really interested in this topic or you feel like you may have been discriminated in the past. We do know, and if you've been seeing our posts, that women in general, and then women of color. Um, we're not there. We are not dollar for dollar. In some cases, in general, like 82 cents. I think Sarah's going to go over that. I don't want to like take all of her fire here, but it goes as low as to like 57 cents for Latino women, and that is just ridiculous. Like I'm over it. I'll just say that I'm over it. Here in Columbus, several years ago, our mayor, Columbus, Ohio, uh, started an initiative called the Columbus Commitment. And essentially, it just asks companies to sign on to commit to equitable pay practices and their HR and whatnot. And I was like, this is brilliant. Why aren't we doing this everywhere? Why, how is this still a thing? How is this still a thing? I just can't take it anymore. And so here we sit. As a growing national network of women in affordable housing. And we have this opportunity to take something like the Columbus Commitment and that idea and really take it back home and, start talking about it, be the squeaky wheel, like pretty much just saying this is not acceptable any longer. And considering what we do and the people that we serve, and just like we should be the example, be the example of the change that you want. And so I'm not going to like keep going on and on and on and on, but I want to quickly just introduce a couple of people that I know that are also on the, volunteering on National One and whatnot. So Stephanie Rhodes, thank you. She's with National Church Residences. She's kind of joined the network team. I know Kathleen Day. POA. She's also on. She's also a very active member, especially on this sort of topic. And then I would be remiss if I did not thank our sponsors in general, but specifically Tidwell Group for doing CPE credit. How fabulous is like we get to actually hear something not so boring, I'm sure, for those of you out there that need CPE. And so thank you to Tidwell Group. Do you want to go ahead and do your little spiel now? And then I'm sure you dropped it in the chat, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to manage many things here, but go ahead.
And I am with the Tidwell Group, and we are sponsoring the CPE. So I just dropped a link in the poll, or I just dropped a link in the chat box to the polls. So if you need CPE, want CPE, or just want to follow along, because we're going to have some poll questions and really get you guys engaged here. So just follow that link, sign in, and there's going to be about 4 questions throughout the session, and just answer all of them. And at the end, you'll fill out an evaluation, and we'll send you a certificate of completion. So just keep an eye and an ear out for them, and we look forward to hearing your responses.
Well, thank you so much for coordinating all that. Now I'm going to pitch it to our amazing consultant, Sarah Driver with Sarah or Driver Consulting. She's been working with us for, I think, over a year. And I know over a year ago, we had a similar panel or discussion on pay equity. It was fantastic. And that was sort of the driver behind working with her going forward on these network, because we want to be educational, not confrontational. So we need to be able to come with data. We need to be able to back it up, not, so Sarah, I'm going to let you take it away and, teach us all the things that we need to take back to our individual offices and homes and just get these conversations started in a way that, we can drive change. So again, thank you so much for all the work you're doing, and take it away.
Thank you so much. I love being with this group because you all are so action oriented and we want to take this back. We want to start to make changes and we want the information we need to do that. So I am so glad to be here again for the 5th workshop in this wonderful series. My name is Sarah Driver. I run Driver Consulting, where I run assessments with individual companies or organizations to help companies access the benefits of gender equality in the workplace, which are many, as we've talked about in prior sessions. Today, we're talking about gender-based pay equality, what it is, how it impacts all of us, what the barriers are to reaching and closing that gap, and then what we can do to take the action steps that are shown to move us in the right direction. So as we go along, as Millie said, feel free to throw questions in the chat, experiences, suggestions, success stories, things that you've had that have overlapped with what we're talking about. And then we'll also take questions along the way as well. So let's start out with our first CPE question. And while we're doing that, I will start the screen share. Go ahead, Vera. I think you're on mute.
Thanks, guys. The first question has been released, and it is, how much does a woman make for every dollar a man makes these days? And so there's a few options there. And so far, we've got 70 cents, 82 cents. It's kind of split right now, but see, it's staying pretty split.
Someday we'll be at 99 cents.
82 cents is taking the lead here. Yeah.
Someday it'll be $1.10, I hope.
There you go. That's great. Well, it sounds like you guys have nailed it. It is 82 cents. And that is really, really sad. And we'll talk more about the ins and outs of that number and how we get to it. But first, as with everything we talk about, we always talk about the benefits of this, whatever topic it is, for everyone in the organization, for the organization as a whole. We know that gender equality in the workplace as an overall umbrella concept benefits men, benefits women. There's benefits to productivity and creativity and innovation. And so there's so much that we all stand to gain from moving these issues forward. And the same, again, research shows for pay equity. There are benefits for everyone. There's higher retention. There's higher employee engagement. There's higher customer engagement and retention. So it's a massive thing. There's, it's not only for the people who are impacted directly by it, but the overall impact of having pay gaps is really big. And the research shows that the impact of closing those gaps produces benefits that are far outweighed by what it costs to close those gaps. So as we said, 82 cents. My favorite way to think about this is that is the equivalent of working for the last 2 months of the year for free. if that's as horrifying to you as it is to me, um, that's just awful. We have seen this issue come to prominence, be recognized for the issue that it is. There've been, the Major League Soccer women's team has achieved parity just, not that long ago in pay parity. We've seen issues raised in Hollywood where pay discrepancies came out. And of course, it affects um, most workplaces, 99% of workplaces. I'd say anyone who doesn't proactively close the gaps has gaps. Okay, so where do these gaps come from? This is really interesting to me because when we can understand where it comes from, we're better able to address it, of course. So there's kind of these four different components that are all rolled into one when we look at the national overall, 82 cents on average for women compared to $1 for the average man. Some of it is kind of broader societal things, and some of it are specific to individual companies and things that we can control. So we'll talk about both of those types of factors. The first one is just the types of fields and fields of work, areas of work that have been available to women. If we remember back to when it was kind of like nursing and teaching were the only options, that wasn't that long ago. And so for, those fields did not provide, they did not have to provide as competitive as salaries as other fields. And so to this day, women are still catching up in equal representation in higher paid fields. Okay, then we've got departments. So in some departments, some types of roles within a company, within a field, have tend to be female heavy. You can think here of like communication or HR sometimes. And sometimes those departments or roles have lower pay on average compared to the departments that are more male heavy. So that contributes to this gap. Then you've got your specific roles within the fields and companies and departments. Women still are not promoted at equal levels as men to positions of management, higher paid. And then the fourth factor is just the salary negotiations, what women are paid when they're coming in for a new position, things like that. We know women face backlash for asking for a higher salary sometimes. And we know that employee evaluation processes that determine annual raises, bonuses, merit pay, increases, all of those are skewed very often. And so women are getting the short end of the stick in that way too. So there's all these different types of barriers. As we can see, some of them are social, some of them are within a company. And this has actually been broken down by researchers to figure out how much of the 18% gap goes with each factor, with each type of factor. So 10% of the 18% gap is able to be attributed to those societal factors like women, don't enter these types of fields as often as men do, and these are the higher paying fields, etc. 8% of the gap is strictly bias when it comes to how much should we pay a woman versus how much should we pay a man. And so this really adds up, as we'll talk about. An 8% gap is massive, an 18% gap is massive. So there's all different fronts that we can be working on, but here of course we're focusing on what we in our individual companies can do, and there's a lot that we can do. Okay, so sadly this gap has hardly budged in the last 20 years. In the 20 years before the end of the century, there was some real movement. And then about 20 years ago, it has barely budged. And the World Economic Forum has the great prognosis of like hundreds of years for us to catch up at the rate that we're going now. So it really is time for us to move this along and get serious about this because, again, as we talked about, this impacts all of us.
And our daughters. I was just gonna say over my dead body. Like, I don't care. Like that's not happening. Anybody else out there that's just like totally over this, just know, like Sarah, tell us what we got to do. What do we need to do?
Okay. So for women, I want us to just sit with the impacts of this pay gap for a minute. Okay, so these differences, 8% here, 10% here, 18% here, adds up to major, major financial impacts that compound over time for individual women. Okay, so if you think about your 401k, if you're a geek like this on data and things, you'll know what a big impact over the course of time a 1% difference has if you have 7% interest versus 8% interest on your 401k, right? So it's just this massive compounding impact over time. Well, if we're talking about 8%, 18%, that has tremendous knock-on effects when it comes to levels of debt of men versus women. Levels of assets are lower for women. Higher poverty rates, longer retirement timeframes. This compounds to hundreds of thousands of dollars over the lifetime earnings loss for your average woman, up to $1 million of lifetime average learning loss for women of color. Just a tremendous impact. And then, of course, for companies, this is a negative impact for them too. They're trying to save money and they're losing money by doing this. We have the impact on how your staff perceives themselves, how they perceive their prospects for advancement. People, especially women, feeling demoralized because they know that they're being paid less for doing the same job. Feeling insecure or undervalued, maybe if they're not sure or they suspect that they're being paid less for doing the same job. Feeling frustrated, underappreciated. These have terrible impacts on a company in terms of morale, engagement, retention, and then a barrier to performance, creativity, higher risk management, all those things that come with people feeling empowered, feeling valued, and feeling that they have a place where they really are paid what they're worth and paid equally with their peers. This is not asking too much by any stretch, of course. And it's a really important issue for our families, for women in our country, and for our companies. So it's a really, really important thing that we're talking about today. And I'm so grateful for the willingness and excitement to get going on actually tackling the issue. Here, let me stop here and do a CPE.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Let me just post that link one more time in case you missed it. You can follow that link, and the poll question is now on blog. Have you been personally impacted by pay gaps, either positively or negatively? Your options are: you're 100% sure, I suspect that I have, I'm really not sure, or I'm pretty sure I haven't. I'm gonna say personally, yes, 100%. But we've got a nice little mix here. I suspect that I have 30%, 100% sure. And yeah, it's kind of across the board, a little bit of everything.
Wonderful.
Some responses, but yeah, looks like a lot of people are pretty sure they have been affected by this pay gap.
Okay. Well, that is a huge thing just to be aware that this could be affecting you personally. So well done. Um, Carolyn had a chat and comment in the chat that said, something I try to normalize within my company is discussing pay. So Carolyn, you have hit on the biggest thing you can do to promote pay equity, which is just simply talking about it and having transparency. The less we talk about it, the less awareness there is. So yes, absolutely. We will be diving in on that. So in addition to the factors that we talked about in terms of, um, the societal, what fields women are going into, how often they're being promoted, how successful they are in negotiating their salaries, there are two other specific factors at play that make the situation worse. And so I want to talk about each one, salary history, and then maternity and caregiving penalties one by one, and then what we can do to address them. Okay, the first is the use of salary history in establishing our employees' starting pay in a company or what their salary bump will be or what they'll be paid when they're promoted to their next position. This is a policy. When we use salary history, we ensure that the gap will never close because we're always tagging it to the lower rate comparatively that women have compared to men. Okay, so again, when we talk about like even 1% over time, the gap becomes huge by the end of people's careers. And so it keeps it keeps one from ever being able to catch up. Okay, so what do we do about salary history and how that makes pay gaps worse? The This is the very easiest thing you can do. You can do it this afternoon. Eliminate requests for salary history for all employment, for all consideration of employee, for all consideration of salary offers. This request for salary history is actually already illegal in 21 states. And there's many, many companies that have stopped doing this. Every company I work with, that's the number one thing, easiest thing you can do is just go hit delete on that line of your job application. Ban the question. Don't factor it in. Just drop it. Whether you're in a state that has a ban or not, just drop the question. GoDaddy is one company that has removed all compensation history questions from their applications. Their quote about it was, "We want our female colleagues to be able to leave their compensation baggage behind." Isn't that a great way of saying
I
it?
love that.
Yeah.
But Sarah,
So
what if you're applying for a new job and it's in a state and it's on the application? Do you fill it out? Do you say you just leave it blank? Like, what should they do?
I personally leave it blank. So I was in a role where that was a requirement. You could not submit your application without it. And I explained, here's why I will not do that. I hope this won't be a barrier. This is a topic that's really important to me. And they were, wouldn't always necessarily go this way, but they were totally fine with that. And they said, okay, well, here's what we're offering other people at the same level. How does that sound to you? That's great. So if you do get pushback, it can potentially kind of give you an idea about how open they are to talking about these types of issues, how they approach these types of issues, if they care about these kinds of issues. So it can be a good way of kind of testing the waters there too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So, this is, we want to get rid of that and make sure people are paid just based on their education, their experience, their talents, their education. Another huge factor that we run into is the maternity and caregiving penalty. This is very well established in the data. I can imagine many of you have experienced this or heard about it. Women who take parental leave can feel the impact of that on their raises and bonuses for the year. It can also affect seniority accrual, which can affect compensation. And again, when you have 1 year where you get kind of dinged for that, that just compounds over time, particularly in companies where salary history plays a role in determining compensation. Or another factor when it comes to the caregiving penalty is that sometimes whoever the primary caregiver is for a young child, or teenagers need us more than anyone sometimes. It doesn't have to be young kids, but caregiving, and this of course can be older family members, it can be not only kids, but sometimes women or the primary caregiver will want to shift down to part-time. And in countries that have a good level of gender equality, you shift down to whatever level you want and your salary is just prorated. But very often here, part-time jobs are not compensated at the same level. And so you take a dramatic decrease. Very often, of course, benefits are not offered with part-time jobs. And so there's this just huge gap when you shift down to part-time sometimes. In addition to the immediate compensation, there's the career trajectory piece that plays into the factor we were talking about in terms of promotion and moving into positions of management. Companies need women to stay on management and leadership tracks because we need women at those higher levels so we can access the benefits of gender equality in the workplace. But when we're not used to that and we're just used to the status quo, we are not willing to think about, okay, could we offer a part-time management position, part-time leadership position, so that you can stay on that track during your childbearing years, during those years of maybe heavy caregiving for whatever reason. Okay, but the companies that find creative ways to keep women on leadership tracks, to keep paying them so that they don't want to drop out of the workforce altogether, which is what happens a lot, where women feel, okay, I'm being paid peanuts. I'm just going to drop out of the workforce altogether. That is a disaster for companies and for our overall economic growth. We need to keep women in as much as they're wanting to. We need to keep them involved, keep them moving towards leadership positions, again, as interest and capacity allows, for the sake of our companies. Okay, so creating part-time leadership and management positions, making sure that that leave for parental leave or caregiving leave does not negatively impact salary for the year or bonuses or seniority accrual. Okay, so those are some tangible things that we want our companies to be doing and that they can be doing. It's not rocket science, it just takes the doing. If that makes sense. Okay, so let's do another CPE question before we jump into the next action steps we can take.
Thanks, Sarah. The poll question is open. Does your company still use salary history when determining employee compensation? You can answer yes, no, or I'm not sure. And let's see, we've got it's pretty split. Mostly I'm not sure. Almost 50% I'm not sure, and a little more no than yes.
Okay, So this is a good question to just go back and ask your HR folks. Is this something we do? Um, is this something that we are asking? And, you can share some of this information to let people know. Here's why it's important just to put it on your radar, depending on what your position is within the company. At least putting it
Yeah,
on your,
I'd make a plug to have your HR professionals join these network events as well, or send them the link to the video and say, this is going to be the new gold standard, by the way, in this industry. At some level, we have to just stop accepting this kind of crap. So, yeah, sorry. I mean, I'm always dropping stuff in here, but
yes, I love it. And the stories, and I'm just reading through some of the chat. Some of the stories are horrible. I mean, just the impact that this has had from, I think specifically to your industry, the closing day sounds like, share my closing bonus with the staff members who helped notarize the documents after working for 3 years on a project. That's from Megan. Um, yeah, these are, yep, yeah, great. So yeah, um,
well, you don't
the
have to stay there. That's the other thing I would say. If you feel like you're being discriminated against, or you suspect it, or there's just not a good culture and it feels funky, then just know that there are other opportunities out there, and not to be afraid. I personally know that sometimes what am I losing? The benefits, can be scary. It can be scary to change, to make a change like that. But sometimes that's when we actually find that we're able to get a bump um, in salary, is actually going to a different job. I hate to say that. It's unfortunate, but that seems like, I don't know, you can comment on that, but
absolutely true. Absolutely. Yeah. And Megan says, I did leave, but probably years after I should have. So I think that is common. I've been there too. Um, Katie says, work somewhere where you are celebrated, not tolerated. And that's you as a whole person. The whole thing of DEI is, can we embrace people as whole people, allow them to be their full selves, and the benefits that that brings to the company from having people feel they don't have to hide the fact that they have to go pick up their child, just being comfortable knowing we're all doing our best work. We're all being evaluated on our results, not on seat time or not on perceptions of, who's working where and when. But, this circles back to so much of what we talked about in prior sessions in terms of how we evaluate employees and how we, making those processes as objective, how we hire employees, making those processes as objective as possible, because we know that our biases play in, and there's not much we can do about it other than removing the possibilities for our biases to play in, and all those different levels and types of subjectivity in our processes are what give us give our biases those entry points. So the more objective we can make things, having criteria in place that you can go through, and it's not just a feeling of how they did in the past year. Those things make a big difference. Okay, so a couple other fixes we can do. Number one is to run the numbers. As we talked about last week, there's all kinds of numbers you can run to help gender equality in the workplace. Last week we talked about running the last session, we talked about running the numbers in terms of where are we in terms of the 30% threshold across our departments through the layers. Now we can run the numbers in terms of looking through our data, salary data, our bonus data, all of it to see where are our gaps. Um, Annual ongoing pay equity audits are standard at many, many companies. Um, I think it's PayPal that does it 3 times a year. And they go through their salary to get data and say, are there any gaps? Where are the gaps? They bump those people up. And as a result, they've closed their pay gap by 90%. That's huge. Okay, so this is a simple data pull, and you can hire people who run these audits. There's fantastic, I mean, it's very straightforward to do once you get the data in there. The second thing is what Caroline talked about. Transparency is the biggest factor, according to this NBER report from 2020. The strongest evidence on effectiveness in narrowing gender disparities is found for policies that increase transparency. Okay, so pay gaps thrive when there's secrecy around money and how negotiation works and salaries. It's hard to negotiate or advocate for yourself when you don't know what the going rate is, right? So very often salaries and pay ranges and who's earning what are kind of insider information that are only available through informal networks. And we know that informal networks tend to be homogenous. And so not everyone has access to that information. This also plays in with the confidence gap. We know that men in general tend to be overconfident relative to their abilities, and women tend to be underconfident relative to their abilities. So when you're feeling like you're shooting in the dark, that confidence gap really plays a big role. How much do I think I'm worth? When you don't have anything to go on, you can be shooting way under what they're saying to do, what they're actually willing to pay, I mean. So one thing that I hear recommended a lot is to never start. If you're, we talk mostly about what we can do as companies, but as individual women, if you're in a salary negotiation, they say, what are you hoping for? What's your range? Always having them start is considered to be a best practice. I'd love to hear your experiences with those. But so things we can do, like including a clear pay range in job description, not a ridiculous range, like somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000, but like really, what are you going to pay? And people can slot themselves in based on, well, I have, I'm at the junior end of the scale or whatever.
Sarah,
Communicate.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm making this up, but I thought that so kind of going back to how do you get this conversation started? How do you kind of go to the water cooler and say, well, this is what I'm making. What are you making? Because we are in a culture, we are in the United States, this is just nobody does this. There's no transparency. We all know that this is how we're being held down. But isn't it illegal for companies to retaliate if you do talk about pay, or do you have to, I mean, do some companies still make you sign a non-disclosure? Like, can you kind of delve into that a little bit more? Because for the average, for me, it's like, well, how would I even start that conversation? And then the person that I'm talking to would probably be really nervous and I don't know. I just feel like a couple more tips on that would be helpful.
Yes. Yeah, that is really good. I know that there are definitely companies that discourage people from talking about it, and they make it seem like it's for the benefit of employees, but we know that it's for the benefit of the company. In terms of how to talk about it, I think some of that depends on your personality. I mean, just thinking of my personal experience, um, one of my girlfriends said to me when she knew I was negotiating for a raise based on a position promotion, she said, well, make sure you know that in this other company, here's what people are making. And so that should factor in with how much you're, so kind of sharing at some of those pivotal moments, but that general conversation starter can be hard, right? So like, um, I think sometimes having a framework around the conversation, a lead in to say, I was reading or I went to this presentation and I found out that when people don't know what each other is making, like, and it can be, maybe um, just saying in broad terms, if we're in the 60s or if we're in the 120s or if we're, sometimes having a little bit of vagueness can be helpful. I'd love to hear other people's success stories about what has been helpful or what has backfired.
It's backfired on me several times. I don't want to, like, that's probably why I'm sitting here. Like, but
Millie,
we did have some comments. I'm sorry, go ahead.
how is it? I'm curious to know how it backfired, and then, well, let me get my comment, and then I'm interested to hear more. But I think like one of the things here is like it's easier to share information with people who are not in your company. Like people are in a peer company, those conversations are easier.
Yeah, and I will say that it's easier to find out how much you're worth when you go apply to a new job. And then you're like, oh, that's probably what I really should be making, by the way. So how did it backfire? And this was many, many years ago, but it was really with the fire that was created in my belly for this whole thing probably started well over maybe like 15 years ago when I was a compliance and monitoring manager and I was actually signing, and this was for NSP2, so it goes way back in the day if any of you guys worked on that stuff, but that I was the compliance and monitoring manager. So I was seeing the salaries, and I saw a gentleman that was like, he was a CPA, but I had a master's. I was a compliance manager, managed 2 people. He managed 0 people. He made over $10,000 more than I did. And I was like, how the F am I, And so and I went to the president and I was like, we were in the car going somewhere, and I was like, I'm going to be honest. I kind of saw the numbers and I just don't think this is fair. And he kind of was like, yeah, sorry, no, yeah, nothing changing, and then you never feel comfortable at that. Like if you don't ever actually make like any progress, there just seems to be like this weirdness. Needless to say, I wasn't there all that long after that, but it was just, yeah. And there's been other times where I've mentioned, hey, I think that this is what I'm worth, and it kind of doesn't go anywhere. But again, I think to Sarah's point earlier, like you start to like tread into those waters and you figure out where you're at pretty quickly. And is this really where I should be? I think that's the answer you'll find the evidence. So
Yeah, is there a rationale that's given? They can say, oh, you're making $10,000 less because of XYZ. But if it's just like, yeah, sorry, that's how it is. Are they
Sarah,
willing
this is Ashley Northcutt.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
yeah, girl.
Hey guys, I just wanted to share on the flip side of that, part of it's the flip side and part is a question. I feel like the company I used to work for was very open about salaries, and they would share like, this is the range. And so that was helpful because you knew, all right, if I don't get promoted, I'm going to get out of that range, but that range was for all people in the company. So that provided, unlike Millie having that uneasy feeling because it was not transparent except for when she saw it in that report and then they kind of shut her down. I think there are some companies that are very open with it. Like, this is the range. Each year you get promoted, this is what you can expect. And if you don't get to that next level, yes, you're going to be stuck at that, but it has nothing to do with gender, that was empowering, I think the word is. Yes. And my question was, I feel like when I managed a lot of people, generations below mine, they don't care if the company tells you not to share information. They all know exactly what every single one of them makes, and it's open conversation. So have you noticed or heard about the trend of, some of us when we came in, like Millie said, we were signing 9 disclosures and not able to talk about our salary. Now that's gone to the wind. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think there's just a lower level of tolerance for that in the next generation. They're aware of it more. It's not something that's like, questioned. Caroline says, I'm 34 and I feel like we're more open about it. Yeah. And I think social media plays into this really powerfully. One example is the hashtag publishing paid me. This was a great, it wasn't not around gender, it was around race. Well, it was, I think it was both actually. So hashtag publishing paid me. What was your advance? How, what was the share of what you were paid for the number of books you sold? And people were shocked, but it's this powerful information sharing mechanism where we can all plug into the same hashtag and find information that we would have no way of knowing any other way. So
So
yeah, the
I was gonna
culturally and then technology wise, there's this kind of snowballing toward this information needs to be public and shared.
I love that. I just wanted to go back real quick. Something Kathleen put in the chat about how do we know where we're at in affordable housing? I don't think we do. We have no clue, but
Mm.
at WAN, this is going to be something that we're dedicated to like looking at one way or another because people are asking us for the data. We're like, like how would we? But so starting to do some data collection, starting to look at like how the network in general, this these sessions, this education, the squeaky wheels that we're creating, the new gold standard that we're all going to start demanding. We got to start somewhere, right? We know it's 82 cents or whatever. But can we start tracking against that? And so, yeah, Kathleen, to your question earlier, I know some other people are using benchmarks like ULI or maybe crew data or whatever, but we need data. We need data in this industry. So I totally agree. And that's, I think, on the horizon. Right, Ashley? Put her on spot.
That's exciting. There's so
Millie,
much.
and I was actually, sorry, you're right, Millie. And I was actually at a conference this week and met up with a company that does this for all types, and they're interested in affordable housing. So hopefully we're making big progress in that space. So yes, and go young people for opening this up so that we start sharing this information.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on this? So like, here's like a couple of things that come to mind is that in looking at compensation, like salary is one element, but in the conversations I've had with women who work here in affordable housing in Chicago, one thing that came up that was not on my radar is also compensation structure. So bonus structures, can be super different. I've only ever worked for a nonprofit developer. We have a basic kind of percentage annual bonus structure. Other places have, percent of the deal. I mean, maybe that's not news to folks on this call, but that was one thing that came up. I think in looking at the, affordable housing, like, so personally, my experience is I have not directly experienced this that I know of. Like, in other words, I guess I want to say that first of all, looking at the 82% is feels like it's going to backfire because that's it's a crude number that doesn't account for like equal job. And so I think that there's a risk of like, there are really compelling anecdotes that I've heard from different women, but we have to be really careful when we present a picture of bias, particularly in our own industry, in an industry that's purports to be friendly to efforts towards equity. And that doesn't mean that it's like, a straight A student, but I guess when we look at affordable housing and pay inequity, I think we should be prepared to find out that in some subfields, there is no gap. And in other subfields, there may be there may be more, or there's like broader work culture issues. But in other words, like I really think we should aim for nuance as much as possible, because like, I'm not in a position of hiring, firing, setting salaries. If I were, I would imagine that it's kind of complicated business having to do with when you're hiring and all these different factors or whatever. And you can aim for transparency, but if somebody were to come up to me and say like, well, why is this? Why is that? And I would be sensitive to the implication that I'm biased against women. So I'm curious to know, Sarah, if you've worked with employers, where you get the pushback from employers who view themselves as like the good guys in this.
Mm-hmm. The defensiveness piece is the number one barrier to all action on gender equality and DEI in general. So I always emphasize with people that this is unintentional. The system was designed in a particular way at a certain time in history, and we just need to update it. it's not because you're a bad person or because you hate women or because you're biased or you think they should be making less. As we talked about in the last session, even people who say that they feel that men and women are equally effective as leaders are more likely to choose a male leader when push comes to shove. That is just how biases work. And so bringing down those defenses is really important, and just saying, how can we develop a system where we all know for sure that people are being paid based on objective measures, and that people are being paid fairly, that people are being paid equally for equal work? How can we know for sure? And so just kind of putting it in this collaborative framework of we want to be in this because, again, going back to, this is something that our company needs to succeed, especially with these younger generations that are coming up. They will not tolerate being asked to sign an NDA about non-disclosure for their salary. Absolutely not. As important as salary is the company's demonstrated commitment to equity. And so this is a gift to our companies to be saying, let's move this forward. I want our future to be strong. I want us to be able to recruit and retain younger talent that we're going to need to move this company into the forward, into the future. All of that kind of framing is really important so that it doesn't feel like, someone feels they're being accused of something. We just want to frame it as we're all working together to make sure that we can tackle this issue, which has proven benefits for everyone in the company, men, women, and the company as a whole in terms of productivity and all of those things that we talked about.
I think that is so important that you just pointed that out. It doesn't have to be super confrontational. And I will just say from personal experience, because with the Columbus commitment, I had to put it in front of leadership for 3 years. I'd go to an event, I'd hear about it, I'd get the flyer, I would put it on the hey, president of my company, we should look at signing this, check it out, it's kind of cool. It took 3 years for them to sign it and to get on board. And then it even took another year and a half, almost 2 years before they actually did anything about it. This is a long game, but a game that we can win tomorrow. We can solve these things, literally, that we could solve this tomorrow if we all went back and did what Sarah just said. Just start a conversation and don't be afraid, and don't become confrontational in a way that you feel like you're putting yourself at risk, or getting a target on you or something. But I loved how you just framed some of that.
Thanks.
Sarah, I have a question kind of related to some of the comments. Kathleen and Cindy both brought up different salary structure and bonus structure, and some of them are more subjective than others. And I wonder if that's something you've seen in the research that shows certain types of structures of pay are more apt to include more opportunities for bias, right? Like if your pay is very much for example, you submit this application, you receive this award, you get X amount of dollars. It's very objective. It's you close X amount of deals, you get X amount of dollars in bonus, versus if the company's doing well, or if this happened, it feels like so much more opportunity for bias, so much more opportunity for folks awarding bonuses to white men, cis white men versus people of color or women.
Yeah, bingo, you just nailed it. That all falls along that spectrum of completely subjective, where bias can just, I I know your family situation, so I think you need more money because of your family. I mean, it could be based on anything. I know your car just broke down, so I'm going to give you a raise, and that's gonna, it's like, okay, that should come from your personal money. So along that line too, and we know that bias is based on stereotypes of what I think, how I interpret, as well as the affinity bias of you're like me, and so I'm more comfortable with you. I think you're doing a better job. all of those things can just run rampant. All the way over to objective, it's based on data, it's based on metrics. Anything you can do to squeeze out the room for bias, you just close that gap. It is the impact. I mean, pay is in some way a symptom. It's its own thing because things like salary history, but it's also the symptom of how much it just kind of lets you know how much bias is there in our system overall. And when we run those audits, even being transparent with the audit results, we found out that there's an 85% or 15% gap. We are going to be doing X, Y, and Z to close that gap because we did not realize this. Now we've taken stock of where we are. We're ready to move forward. We want this to be a place where everyone's paid. And being in the place of cheerleading that transparency, because sometimes people can say, oh, it's 85%. Now we know. Okay, so, and if they have steps and plans in place to move things forward, cheerleading that sharing of information rather than coming down hard and saying, I always knew there was this gap and this is an unfair place to work, which it may be, but kind of taking that problem solving approach of, great, now we have this data, we know what to do with it.
We have 4 minutes till 1. I hope that, we could probably go over a little bit, but may have other CPE questions that people might have to jet. So we're having awesome conversation though.
This was great.
Great segue. Hey guys, one more time, one last poll question. There's the link in case you need it again. Oops. And it is unlocked. Have you heard your company address or talk about pay equity or steps they're taking to close the gap? It's a yes or no question. Let's see, and mostly no's. Got a lot of no's and a little bit of yes. But 90% says no.
90% says no.
And the 10% on here are probably people from Columbus who of 370 companies here locally. And we have, Fortune 500 companies that have signed the Columbus commitment. You're probably the 10% that said yes, I would imagine. So take that home. Be like, this is happening in Columbus. The mayor of Columbus has done this. Like, it doesn't just have to be Network and Women's Affordable Housing Network, and can be a larger, push.
Exactly right. This is happening on a citywide basis. This is happening in some places on a statewide basis. These pay equity pledges that are available, typically they will require companies to run an annual pay audit and then to commit to particular practices and implementing best practices, looking at their policies to see where they can minimize bias. Again, back to that. So there are phenomenal things that are happening that are moving forward, and it's just something that we need to speed up and snowball and bring up in these ways to say, this is an issue, it ties into these other issues. We want to be proactive and making sure that our company is positioned in the very best way to be attracting and retaining the talent we need to be succeeding in the future.
And sorry, just to interrupt real quick. For those of you who have participated in the CPE poll questions, make sure you fill out the evaluation, because once you complete that evaluation, then we'll have the information we need to send you your certificate for completion. And thank you again so much for participating.
Yes, thank you, Tidwell. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so I do want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time, but thank you so much for being part of these conversations. It really, I hope you feel tooled up and ready to go back and get things moving in your corner of the world.
Yeah, I do hope after today, I'm like, I think we need a salary negotiations. Like, I think we would benefit. We did that in Ohio, and I think that more on the national front, we would benefit from that. It was really interesting, and I think it's good good information to have But yes, I just want to thank everyone for coming today. Keep looking out for our next session with Sarah. And we have 3 more this year, and then we're sort of planning ahead on what network will be doing going forward. So again, we appreciate you all being here. Love any feedback you may have. And yes, squeaky wheels. We had like 30 plus of them on today. So take it home and do something. All right, we can solve this.
Bye,
Take
ladies.
care.
Thank you,
All right.
Sarah. Thanks, Millie.
Bye.